ISA server management, and client configuration. The goal of this nugget is twofold. By the time you're done here, you will understand, install, and configure the various flavors of ISA server clients that are out there. There's actually 3 of them that you can use, and we'll talk about each one. The second section of this, and there's many different sub-bullets under each one of these, but the second major section is going to focus on maintaining the ISA server, backing up your configuration data, making sure that your local address table, the LAT that we just talked about in the previous nugget, making sure that that is accurate and changing it if necessary. Personally, I believe you're going to really love this section because, in my opinion, this is where it becomes real. This is where you'll see some of the items as we go through and you'll think, hey, I could use that. Or, you know what? That'll work in our business, and man, I could even use that on my home network. That's why I love this section, is because it starts taking us through some real-world scenarios where these clients will fit into place. As we begin to explore the different types of ISA server clients, I want you to imagine these little guys as tools in your tool belt. Now, you know that tools can address different needs, and that's mainly what they're meant to do. But sometimes the functions of tools can overlap. For example, you might have a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. And you might be able to take out the same screw with either one, depending on the type of screw head that it has. But mainly they're meant to address different needs. That's the same idea with the ISA server clients. They're mainly meant to address different situations, but a lot of their functions may overlap. The second thing that we're going to do is talk about the configuration of them. That can be a big deal when you're deciding which one to deploy. Some of them, just a couple checkboxes away from configuring it completely. Some of the other ones may require a complete domain-wide software deployment. Wow. So we'll have to think about that when we're considering which client to use. There are 3 different types of ISA server clients. As you already know, there's the web proxy client, the secure NAT client, and the firewall client, each one addressing a little bit different need. So let's start off with the web proxy client. Now, when you think of internet access, what do you usually think of? And what does most people think of? Surfing the web, man. Opening Internet Explorer or Netscape and surfing around. Well, that's what the web proxy is designed to do. It allows your web browser to access the internet, but that's about it. Now, instantly, when I say that, people think, oh no, no email? Nope, no direct email access from the internet. What about online games? Nope, sorry, probably not going to happen with online games either. Instantly, all the negative flags begin flying up on the web proxy service. And I initially joined the bandwagon. When I was thinking of it, I thought, man, well, that's really limited. But if you really begin thinking about it, is it? I mean, here's a standard user desktop. Now, think about a workday from the perspective of a user. Put yourself in the shoes of the user. You just came in, it's 8 in the morning, what do? Well, you're probably going to open Internet Explorer and go to CNN.com or something like that. Surf that for a little while, close it, and then what's the next thing? You're going to go to your email. Oh, doesn't that cause a problem? Well, as I mentioned, there's no direct email access if you're using the web proxy client. However, how many businesses do you know of that allow direct email access? Most of them will use an internal web server. They'll have Exchange running on their internal network, and the Exchange will be doing all the email incoming and outgoing and that sort of thing on the network. So we've solved one of the major problems there. Now, of course, the user, since they can use a web browser, they can always get to something like hotmail.com if they're using an email based in the web browser. So what do we do then as a normal user? Well, you might think, well, what about, a ping message, or what about a trace route? Will those work? Well, no, those won't work, but is that a normal user? Do they do that kind of thing? Not normally. So you see, most of the applications that a normal user use consist, at least network-based, of a web browser and email. And if both of those are taken care of, we should be good to go. So here's how you configure it. You can go to the Tools menu, select Internet Options, and then go to the Connections area. Under that, we have the LAN settings. I'll click on that. And we have this box right here for the proxy server. I'll check that box, and this is where we would type in the address of our ISA server, the internal address. 192.168.1.1 is what we're going to use in this case to reach the ISA server. And here's the key. The port is going to always be, by default, 8080. In previous versions, like proxy server, it was just 80. But by default in ISA server, it's going to be 8080. Now what's this checkbox? Bypass proxy server for local addresses. Well, that is a checkbox I'd recommend checking. Here's why. You have your own local network, and sometimes you may have intranet servers running on that network. If you don't check this checkbox, your client will begin going to the ISA server to reach even the internal servers. So by checking this, the client will check its own little mini routing table. It will say, well, I'm in the 192.168 subnet, so if I'm accessing something else in the 192.168 subnet, I probably don't need to go to the ISA server. That's what this one does. Let's get into the advanced options. You can see here that we can access more than just the HTTP protocol by using a proxy server. We can also use the secure, which is HTTPS, to access secure websites. FTP, the file transfer protocol, because we can use that in a web browser. I haven't used it in a while, but we have Gopher that we can still use. I don't know many people still using Gopher. And we have the SOX protocol. Now don't worry, we're going to talk about all of these protocols in a future nugget. But by default, we will use the same proxy server and port number for all protocols, and we can configure our ISA server to do that. We can also specify different proxy servers and different port numbers for each protocol that's out there. These are all, here's the key, accessed within the web browser. We also have this exceptions field. It's very similar to that checkbox that I had bypassed the proxy server for the local addresses, except this can go even further. Maybe there's an address that's not local, at least your client doesn't know it's local, but you know that it's on your internal subnets. It might be the 172.16 subnet. Well, what you can do is put 172.16.star. And now this client will bypass the ISA server for all those addresses. 10.star. Any address that now starts with 10 will also be bypassed. So we can specify certain subnets that we don't want to send to the ISA server if we have those running on our internal network. We click OK, 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 and we're good to go. This web browser is now configured to access the internet through the ISA server. Now do remember, that is just the web browser that can access the internet now. The rest of the computer is just going to be using its default gateway for everything else. Now, I did mention that this is limited. I mean, think of the word web proxy. You would think it's limited to web browsers. Well, as of recently, fairly recently, there's been some applications that have been coming out that allows you to expand that. For instance, let's take the Windows Media Player, for example. And I'm going to go to the Tools menu of this and hit the Options. If I go up to the Network tab, what you'll see under here is that I now have the ability, we see Streaming Protocols, and then down here, Streaming Proxy Settings. So we can define for the different protocols running in the media player, for instance, of course it does use the HTTP protocol, we can configure that to use the proxy settings of the web browser. What's more is we can even get into some of the audio streaming, the MMS and the RTSP. These are the audio streams that come into the media player. We can have them use a proxy server as well. Now you notice it's by default using a different port number than 8080. Yes, this can mean some extra configuration on our ISA server, but this is the cool thing. We can use the web proxy client and still start using some applications. Now, I'm not saying all of them support this, just a select few. Some applications even outside of the web browser. And that is the web proxy client, which can do more than most people think. Let's hit the second client, which is actually going to be the most common one that you'll find. That is the Secure NAT client. Now, most people have heard of network address translation. It's the system that allows you to translate from a private internal address to a public internet valid address, and furthermore, share that address between many computers. Nearly all major businesses in the world that have internet access for their internal employees will use network address translation. And hey, I mean, most people even use this at their home that have the cable modem or the DSL and they want multiple computers to use that connection. SecureNAT is ISOServer's way of enhancing that. It pretty much is a system that says your NAT clients are now secure because they are behind the ISOServer. The reason this is the most common client is because nearly all applications will work with this. Well, matter of fact, in the last couple of years, I haven't seen an application that doesn't work with network address translation. Nearly all of them are coded to work behind a firewall and accept those kind of translations that will occur. So you're not limited to just Internet Explorer or Netscape like you are with the web proxy clients. The second reason why is because it is vendor specific. It uses TCP/IP, so any operating system that supports TCP/IP can support SecureNAT. And the configuration, it's amazingly easy. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to right-click on my network adapter card, hit Properties, and this is on the client machine. Go to TCP/IP, and all I would need to do is specify that the ISOServer is my default gateway. And we'll use the same address, 192.168.1.1. That's the whole idea. Now, of course, we have to type in all the other IP address information, but the beauty is we can even use DHCP and just tell the DHCP server to assign the ISOServer as the default gateway. That's the only configuration necessary to make a secure NAT client work. So I'm sure right about now you're thinking, why wouldn't I use a secure NAT client? I think I found my candidate right here for all my clients. I mean, it supports all the applications. It has the easy configuration. It supports all operating systems. Why wouldn't you use it? Well, there's only one thing that it's missing. And for some people, this isn't much of a problem. It does not have user authentication. So it doesn't let me apply user-by-user configurations. For example, I might want to say Becky can access CNN.com, but sorry, Dan cannot because he spends all his time there. So you could apply user-by-user permissions with ISOServer, but it's not possible if you have SecureNAT. That's where the firewall client comes in. It does just about the same thing as the SecureNAT client, but it adds this missing piece. When you set up the firewall client on these operating systems, it allows user authentication, so I can apply permissions by users or groups in Windows 2000. This does have two big drawbacks, though. It is Microsoft only. It has to be installed on a Microsoft operating system because it is a full client installation, and that's the second disadvantage. It's a full client installation. You have to go to every single machine in the enterprise and install this firewall client. Now, it's not as bad as it sounds initially. Let me show you how you can set this up. The first way to set up the firewall client software is through a share. I'm going to do a /ISA from this client. Now, ISA when it installs, creates the share MSP client. I didn't create that. So it's on there by default. I open it and run the setup.exe file underneath. That will start the install of the firewall client on this PC. Now, the installation process for the firewall client is really straightforward. Just about anybody can do it. So you may want to delegate this if you have many clients to install to maybe another administrator who does the help desk support. Comes up and says, click Next. Where do you want to install it? Click Next, install. That's all there is to it. So that's the first way to install the firewall client. Now, while this is installing on this client, let me jump over to the ISOServer and show you the second way. Now I'm on the ISOServer itself. And the second way to install the ISOServer client is by setting up a web page. I've already typed in the path to the web files here. I've got /program files /Microsoft ISOServer /clients/web_inst. Long path, but when you open it, it will have all the files you need that you can place onto a web server so that the client will be installable via a web page. Watch this. I'm going to select them all, hit Control-C to copy. jump over to the c:/inetpub www root, which is where my web server is looking for its files, and paste them in here. Now it's going to copy those files. Oh, I must have missed them. Let me do that again. It's going to copy those files into this www root directory, so they're now accessible through the web server application. Let me jump back to the client. Now that I'm back on the client, I've opened a web browser, and I'm going to point it to http, my ISA server's name, /default.htm. And by the way, you can rename this to anything you want, like isaclient.htm or whatever you'd like to do. You notice the web page comes up, and all I need to do is come down here and click this link. It does mention if you're using Netscape Navigator, you'll need to save the file to your hard drive, then run it from there. But this is the second way that I can now install the client through a web browser rather than using the UNC path from the run prompts. There's still one more method. The third and final way that we can install the firewall client is through an MSI file. I'm going to take you back to the ISA server share, the MSP client, and select this file, ms_fwc.msi. It's a Windows installer package. As soon as you see that, you should have a little ping light bulb go off inside of your head and think group policy. Yes, we can install the firewall client through a group policy that deploys software applications. This is the easiest way to reach thousands of clients all at the same time without having to go to each and every client PC, because we can install software on those clients from a central source. If you want more info on group policies that deploy software applications, check out the CBT Nugget Exam Pack 70-217. It takes you through the entire group policy process, including the software application deployment. My friends, that is all there is to the ISA server clients. To review, the web proxy client, good for surfing only, mainly if people just use web browsers to access the internet. SecureNet, most common client out there because it's very easy to deploy. It is vendor specific. It doesn't have to be Microsoft. And it works with just about all applications that run on the network. The only problem is it has no user authentication. That is resolved with the firewall client, which has the user authentication, but has the disadvantage of working only on a Microsoft operating system. Windows only can use this firewall client. The remainder of this nugget is going to be focused around maintaining the ISA server. Now that we have the ISA server installed, our clients are installed, how do we start managing the services? We're going to talk about using the ISA management. We're going to look at maintaining that local address table and now the local domain table as well. You need to make sure everything is backed up and able to be restored configuration-wise for the ISA server, so we'll show you how to do that. Finally, we'll start getting into managing the ISA services. Now, do mind you, the rest of this entire CBT Nugget series are going to be focused around these two items: maintaining the ISA server, managing the ISA server, setting up our different features. This section is just meant to give an introduction. Here's the console. Here's how you use it. Here's how you set it up so it works well for you. About 90% of your administration is going to be performed through the ISA Management Console. When you install ISA Server, it's going to make this Microsoft ISA Server menu setting and add ISA Management, that's the one I'm speaking of, and then the ISA Performance Monitor. That is pretty much the Windows Performance Monitor with some new counters added that it can actually tap into the resources ISA Server consumes on your server. Now I've went ahead and drag and dropped it to the common dropped items right over here so I can open it easily, and I've made it even easier. I've opened it on the bottom. Now this is what the initial console will look like, and you might remember in the previous nuggets I was mentioning this Getting Started wizard. After the installation of ISA Server completed, it asked if we wanted to use the Getting Started wizard. This Getting Started wizard is actually pretty handy because it takes you through step by step the configuration of all the common policies that make ISA Server function. And you can walk through and click Next, and the first thing you'll do is select policy elements, and it'll scroll down and give you the direction down here with a little script that you can click on the bottom. Now what this is doing in the background is it's actually setting up inside of the ISA Management Console all of the things that you'll need. Now this thing is great if you're getting started with it, but usually once you've gone through this CBT Nugget series, I think you're going to feel comfortable setting it all up manually, because it does give you more control that way. It lets you fine-tune each and every option. With that being said, there's also two views that you can select in the ISA Management Console. What we see right here is considered the TaskPad view. Everything is pretty point and click. We have buttons that we can click on, and you may remember back in the Windows 2000 world, we could create TaskPad custom administration tools that makes it really easy for somebody who doesn't know too much about the policies of Windows 2000 to configure them. For instance, we could create a TaskPad button that says change password for client, and you click it and it starts changing passwords for clients. That is the way that ISA Server is configured initially. It is set to view everything in this TaskPad view where we have very simple buttons to click on. Once you get very familiar with ISA Server, you're probably going to change this view from TaskPad to Advanced. When you do that, all the wizards go away. Well, there will still be wizards, but the TaskPad view is gone. You can see as I click through each and every option, there's no more big buttons to click on the side because everything is now manually configured. If we want to set up an access policy, we need to right-click the area that we want to set up, hit New, and in this case, Rule to create a new site and content rule. You see the wizards are still here. It's just the easy access TaskPad buttons are completely gone. And what view you choose will be totally up to you. One of the first things I would like to show you in the ISA Management Console is how to adjust the local address table. And if you don't mind, I'm going to change this over to the Advanced view. It just feels a little cleaner to me. I'm going to go under this network configuration over on the left-hand side, and I see the local address table, the LAT. And underneath there, I see all the ranges that I added to this during the installation of the ISA Server. And let's say I want to add one more. I can right-click on it, hit New, and LAT entry. I type in the range I'd like to add, maybe 172.12.1.0 all the way up through 172.14.1.0. Those will then be added to the local address table, and we see that entry over here. Now, if I want to remove something, I just right-click and choose Delete, and it will ask me if I'd like to confirm, and that's really how easy it is to modify the LAT after the installation. Notice I can also run the Construct LAT wizard, or selection tool that I used during the install to automatically add the private ranges and use the routing table of the ISA Server to choose which addresses I would like to add to that database. Now there's a new one under here, the local domain table. This is one that allows me to define domains rather than addresses. Check it out. I'm going to right-click on it, hit New, LDT entry. That's a local domain table. And I can choose what sort of entries I would like to add and recognize as local to my ISA Server. I'll use nuggetlab.com. When I enter that, it's going to add it to the local domain table, which the ISA Server now realizes is on the local network. What's more is your client will realize that it's local, and instead of sending it to the ISA Server to forward off to the Internet, it will try and look it up locally in the local DNS server. Now you notice I said client, not clients. There is a catch. The local domain table only works, and this is key, with the ISA Server firewall client. It does not work with SecureNAT or the web proxy. That is why it doesn't have you configure this during the install, is because many people won't use this unless they install the firewall clients on all the PCs. But if you'd like to, you can define every domain that is local to your organization. That's the two major things that you can adjust in here to make sure that the ISA Server clients operate in the most efficient way. Okay, before we get too deep into this configuration, let's talk about backing up and restoring your ISA Server. It's easier than you think. I'll minimize this ISA Server over here because all I need to do is go under the Servers and Arrays in the ISA Server Management Console, right-click on it, and choose Backup. It's going to ask me where do I want to store it. I'll browse, and might as well save it on the desktop, and I'll say ISA Backup. It's as easy as pie, as old Aunt Bee would say. I'll go ahead and click on OK, and it's going to start storing the configuration data. That's the key, not the cache files, not anything else, just the configuration to the desktop. Let's minimize this. I'm going to right-click on this isoback.bif. That's the file extension. This is a log. I right-click on it and choose Properties, and I see that it's only a megabyte. Only a megabyte. I could put that on a floppy disk. Since it's only the configuration, it's going to stay relatively small. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, Jeremy, we haven't configured much yet. Yeah, I know. But overall, there's not much more to it than that. You can add your rules, but in the backup world, all those really are text documents that it's storing inside of that backup. To restore the backup, right-click on the ISO server, hit Restore. It'll say you're going to overwrite your existing config. That's okay. We find our backup file, and voila. We click OK and have it restore. Now, I'm not going to do that just for sake of redundancy. I don't want to restore configs on top of an already existing one when they're identical. Now, a big note here, a huge note. Think about this situation. You think, wow, I can back this up and store it on a floppy. So you take this back up, drag and drop it to the 3.5-inch floppy, and go grab some coffee while it copies. Floppies aren't that fast. You come back and your floppy is gone. What just happened? Somebody swiped your floppy. Well, no big deal. I can generate another backup. Be careful. Every single configuration item that secures your firewall exists on that floppy. You better pull a Mission Impossible stunt and jump after that person who grabbed the floppy out of the drive. It is a critical thing to make sure that you keep this backup secure. Set NTFS permissions, store it off-site, do something to make sure that your backups are secure, because if anybody gets any one of your backups, they have access to your entire ISO server configuration. They can build their own ISO server in a lab environment and restore that config onto there to see what you have configured. So be very careful what you do with these backups. The last thing I want to discuss with you in this nugget is the ISO server services. I'm going to open the Windows 2003 Services Control Panel. I'm going to click on the standard view, a little easier to see. Scroll down about halfway and we see a few services that are used for ISO server. First one is the ISO server control. This is pretty much the core, the engine of the ISO server. It's the one that starts all the other services, generates all the alerts, all the actions that take place, set up the log files, updates the client configurations on the fly. This pretty much is the core component. If this is stopped, none of your ISO server will be working. You see the Microsoft firewall right here. This is the service that handles all the requests from your firewall clients and your secure NAT clients. So if this one is stopped, they will not be able to be processed. Likewise, the web proxy down here, Microsoft Web Proxy, that supports all the web proxy clients that are out there. Here we see the Microsoft Scheduled Cache Content Download Service, which allows you to go out on a scheduled basis and download files into your cache server to kind of prepare for requests coming from clients. Once you have a good idea of traffic patterns, this one can help you out a lot. And finally, we have the H323 Gatekeeper service. I know we haven't talked a thing about the Gatekeeper service that comes with ISO server, but we will in a future nugget. There's a whole section on it. Let me give you a 10,000-foot view for now. The Gatekeeper, every time I say that word, I can't help but think back to the old movie Labyrinth, really old. It was where this young kid comes up to the gate of the labyrinth, and there's this gatekeeper always trying to mess him up all the way through. He controls everything inside of that labyrinth and handles all of the people that run through that labyrinth trying to mess this kid up. In the same way, in a similar fashion I should say, the H323 Gatekeeper is like the Lord of multimedia for your network. Imagine this. Imagine you had a network that had 1,000 NetMeeting clients, and you regularly had broadcasts from the CEO once a week to all those NetMeeting clients. And people inside that organization use NetMeeting to do video conference between each other. This Gatekeeper has the power to control all of those clients. It could be the central meeting point that people go to and say, hey, is the John NetMeeting client open? And if so, I want to open a voice conversation with video streams to John. The gatekeeper will check and see if John is capable to support both voice and video and open that stream to John if permissions allow. That's pretty much a 10,000-foot view of what the gatekeeper service does. It manages the multimedia on your network. Well, let's sum up. Where have we been in this nugget? Well, you now know what the ISA server clients are. The three different types, the web proxy, secure NAT, and the firewall clients. You can install them and you can configure them to support the ISA server. You also know the foundations of maintaining the ISA server, what the ISA Management Console is, and critically, how to back up and restore your server so if anything is lost, you can always bring it back in that base configuration that you've saved in a very secure place. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.